In the early hours of June 14, 2023, the tranquility of Brookhaven was shattered by a single, desperate phone call. A woman's trembling voice pierced the silence. "My husband, he's not breathing. Please, you have to hurry." Elizabeth O'Reilly's plea for help reverberated through the emergency lines, setting into motion a chain of events that would unravel a story far more complex than anyone could have foreseen. Paramedics arrived at the scene, a seemingly ordinary home on the corner of Willow Lane. Inside, they found Richard O'Reilly lying unresponsive in the living room, his body showing no immediate signs of trauma. His wife, Elizabeth, sat sobbing on the couch, clutching their young daughter's stuffed animal. Detective Michael, a veteran investigator with over 15 years of experience, arrived shortly after the paramedics. Known for his meticulous attention to detail, he quickly surveyed the scene. At first glance, it appeared to be a home invasion gone tragically wrong. A shattered window suggested forced entry. Items were strewn across the floor, as if in a frantic search for valuables. Elizabeth tearfully recounted hearing a commotion before finding her husband on the floor. Her account was heart-wrenching, painting a picture of a mother and wife caught in the chaos of a senseless crime. But as Detective Michael examined the scene, subtle details began to emerge, details that raised questions. The placement of the shattered glass, the peculiar arrangement of the scattered belongings, and Elizabeth's demeanor, oscillating between grief and something harder to define. Was this truly the result of a random break-in? Or was there something more? Something hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered? Elizabeth O'Reilly, a woman of ambition and poise. As a successful entrepreneur, she was admired by her peers and respected in her community. To the outside world, she was the epitome of strength, a woman who seemed to have it all. Richard O'Reilly, a man of quiet strength and unwavering dedication. To his friends, he was the dependable one, the peacemaker. To Elizabeth, he was a supportive partner. And to Kara, he was her world. Kara, their 7-year-old daughter. A bright, joyful child who loved to draw and tell stories. She was their shared light, a bond that seemed unbreakable. And then, there was Detective Michael. A man who had seen it all, or so he thought. As he delved deeper into the O'Reilly story, he found himself faced with a mystery that would test not only his skills but his understanding of human nature. This is more than just a story about a crime. It's a story about power, how it shifts, how it's wielded, and how it can destroy. It's a story about relationships, about the unspoken tensions that simmer beneath the surface, about choices made in the heat of conflict, and about the devastating consequences of betrayal. But most of all, it's a story about the ripple effects of tragedy, how one night can shatter a family, a community, and the very idea of trust. What really happened in the O'Reilly home that night? And how did a family's love turn into something so unrecognizable? This is their story. Over a decade ago, Elizabeth and Richard O'Reilly were the embodiment of a modern love story. They met in their late 20s, drawn together by shared dreams of building a life filled with purpose and stability. Both ambitious, both driven, they envisioned a future of partnership and mutual success. Elizabeth was vivacious, sharp, and fiercely independent. Richard, on the other hand, was calm, collected, and deeply loyal. Their differences complemented each other, creating a bond that seemed unshakable. The perfect combo, so we thought. The birth of their daughter, Kara, brought new joy into their lives. For Elizabeth and Richard, she was their greatest accomplishment, their shared treasure. But even in those early days, subtle cracks began to form. Small disagreements, fleeting moments of frustration. Seeds of tension that would later take root. As the years passed, the dynamics of their relationship began to shift. Elizabeth's career in marketing took off, propelling her to a position of influence and financial independence. She became the primary breadwinner, a role she embraced wholeheartedly. Richard, ever the supportive partner, stepped back from his own career ambitions to focus on the home front. He took pride in being a hands-on father and creating a stable environment for Kara. To the outside world, their arrangement seemed progressive, an egalitarian division of responsibilities. But within the walls of their home, the balance of power began to tilt. Elizabeth's growing dominance in the household was met with quiet acquiescence from Richard. Friends noticed subtle changes in the couple's dynamic. Elizabeth's tone grew sharper, her patience thinner, while Richard seemed to retreat into himself. Despite the underlying tensions, the O'Reillys maintained a semblance of normalcy. Their days were filled with the routines of family life, school runs, shared meals, and bedtime stories. For Kara, her parents were her world, her heroes. But for Elizabeth and Richard, their shared life had become something else entirely. Beneath the surface, unspoken frustrations and unmet expectations festered. Kara's laughter often filled their home, masking the growing divide between her parents. For her, their world was one of love and security. For them, it was becoming a quiet battleground. They were a family caught in a delicate balance, each holding on to the roles they thought they had to play. But how long could they keep pretending that everything was fine? The O'Reillys' life appeared to be one of harmony and success. But appearances can deceive. Beneath the smiles and routines lay a tension that would soon reach its breaking point. The night began like so many others. Elizabeth had retreated to her home office, immersed in her work, while Richard lingered downstairs, lost in thought. But this night was different. After years of quiet frustration and countless attempts to bridge the growing divide, Richard had reached his breaking point. Gathering his courage, Richard decided it was time to confront the woman he once believed was his partner in every sense of the word. He entered the room with a calm resolve, but his heart raced with the weight of what he was about to say. Elizabeth greeted him with a glance, her tone curt, dismissive. To her, this was another interruption, another moment when Richard's concerns felt like an inconvenience. "Elizabeth, we need to talk," he began. His words were steady, but the frustration of years past seeped through. He spoke of the disrespect, the growing gulf between them, and the toll it had taken, not just on him, but on Kara as well. Richard had tried, time and time again, to address the cracks in their relationship. But each attempt was met with deflection or silence. Tonight, he made it clear, this was the last time he would try. If things don't change, if we can't find a way back to respect and partnership, I'll have no choice but to leave, and I'll take Kara with me. Elizabeth's response was swift and cutting. She refused to acknowledge the possibility of fault or offer an apology. Her pride, her sense of control, would not allow it. Instead, she dismissed Richard's words as empty threats. That night, as Richard retreated to the guest room, he felt a strange mix of relief and dread. He had finally spoken his truth, but the response left him with more questions than answers. Elizabeth, on the other hand, was far from indifferent. As the house grew quiet, a shift took place. The poised, confident woman transformed. Her calm demeanor gave way to an unsettling coldness, calculated, deliberate. At first glance, her actions seemed harmless, routine internet searches, late-night planning. But beneath the surface, a darker intention was taking shape. Her searches grew more specific, her focus more intense, as though the gears in her mind were turning toward something unthinkable. For Elizabeth, the confrontation was not a wake-up call, but a challenge. Richard's ultimatum, his threat to disrupt the life she had meticulously built, became a problem to solve. And Elizabeth was nothing if not a problem solver. Her pride, her refusal to cede control, began to fuel something far more dangerous. What had started as a power struggle was now evolving into a calculated plan, one that would leave no room for compromise. Elizabeth's thoughts were no longer on reconciliation or resolution. Instead, they turned toward preservation of her image, her control, and her carefully curated life. The seeds of her plan were planted, and soon they would take root. The O'Reillys had reached a tipping point. But as Elizabeth's plan began to unfold, the question was no longer whether their marriage could be saved, it was how far she would go to ensure it couldn't. Detective Michael was no stranger to complex cases. With over 15 years of experience, he had earned a reputation for his sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of the truth. When he arrived at the O'Reilly home that fateful night, it seemed at first to be a straightforward case of a home invasion gone tragically wrong. But something about the scene gave him pause. Something about this robbery doesn't add up, he thought, his mind already piecing together the anomalies he'd observed. As the paramedics worked, Detective Michael began his examination. The broken window, the scattered belongings, the sobbing wife, on the surface, it fit the narrative of a chaotic burglary. But the more he looked, the less it felt like the scene of a random crime. His gut told him there was more to this story, and his instincts rarely failed him. Michael's first step was to thoroughly document the scene. The broken window became his initial focus. The placement of the shattered glass was peculiar, it lay mostly outside the home, suggesting that the window had been broken from the inside. He crouched down, running his gloved hand over the shards. The jagged edges and the lack of glass on the inside floor raised immediate red flags. As he moved through the living room, his eyes landed on the scattered belongings. A purse, a stack of papers, and an overturned lamp were among the items strewn about. But the placement felt deliberate rather than chaotic. Expensive electronics and jewelry were left untouched, while the items missing from the home were trivial, things like an old clock and a photo frame. It was, as Michael noted in his report, an amateur's attempt at staging. Meanwhile, the forensic team uncovered additional inconsistencies. The timing of the supposed break-in didn't align with Elizabeth's account. She claimed to have heard the commotion just minutes before calling 911, but the blood pooling on Richard's body suggested he had been lying there much longer. The time gap couldn't be ignored. As Detective Michael dug deeper, testimonies from the O'Reillys' friends and neighbors began to paint a more complicated picture. Some spoke highly of Elizabeth, describing her as a successful entrepreneur and devoted mother. But others hinted at tension within the household, loud arguments that could be heard from next door, Richard spending long hours at home with Cara, and Elizabeth frequently working late nights. One neighbor recalled seeing Elizabeth leaving the house earlier that evening, her face pale and her movements hurried. These small, seemingly disconnected details started to form a troubling pattern. Just as Michael began to solidify his theory, a surprising development occurred. A witness came forward, a man who claimed to have seen an unfamiliar car parked near the O'Reilly home on the night of the incident. The description was vague. A dark sedan with tinted windows, but it was enough to widen the scope of the investigation. Could there be another party involved? Or was this a red herring meant to divert attention? The witness also mentioned seeing a figure near the house, wearing a dark hoodie. This clue led Michael to explore the possibility of an external suspect, someone who might have targeted the O'Reillys for reasons unknown. After combing through police records, a name emerged, a local with a history of burglary and a reputation for trouble. The individual was brought in for questioning, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though the case might take a different turn. But as Michael reviewed the evidence, the pieces didn't fit. The suspect had an alibi for the night in question, corroborated by multiple witnesses. The timeline and method of the crime didn't match their usual patterns. With this lead ruled out, Michael returned to the one place where the answers seemed to lie, the O'Reilly home. With every new clue, the focus of the investigation shifted back to Elizabeth. Michael began to re-examine her 911 call, noting the tone of her voice and the specific words she chose. There was a peculiar balance of panic and control in her speech, as though she were trying to sound distraught but not entirely overwhelmed. He played the recording over and over, searching for nuances that might reveal her true emotions. Michael also analyzed Elizabeth's behavior at the scene. While her tears seemed genuine, her interactions with the investigators raised questions. She was cooperative, but often deflected questions about her relationship with Richard. When asked about the items taken during the supposed robbery, her answers were inconsistent, sometimes changing entirely. She described her husband as a good man, but there was an absence of warmth in her words, as though she were rehearsing a line rather than expressing genuine grief. Detective Michael also turned his attention to the couple's financial records. A deeper dive revealed that Elizabeth had recently increased Richard's life insurance policy, a substantial sum that would be paid out in the event of his death. This discovery was coupled with a string of large, unexplained purchases made under her name, some of which occurred just days before the incident. The financial trail added a new layer of suspicion. Then came the most damning evidence: Elizabeth's search history. Forensic analysts retrieved deleted queries from her devices, revealing searches like how to stage a burglary, undetectable poisons, and how long does it take for sedatives to work. Each search painted a chilling picture of premeditation and intent. Detective Michael's meticulous work began to pay off. Piece by piece, he constructed a timeline of events that suggested Elizabeth had orchestrated her husband's death and attempted to disguise it as a robbery gone wrong. The evidence, both physical and circumstantial, was overwhelming. By the time Michael presented his findings, the case against Elizabeth was undeniable. The inconsistencies, the financial motives, the staged crime scene, and the suspicious online searches all pointed to one conclusion: Richard O'Reilly's death was no accident, and it was no random crime. It was, instead, the result of a cold and calculated plan devised by someone he had trusted the most. Detective Michael had seen countless crime scenes over the years, but something about this one felt off from the start. Elizabeth O'Reilly's grief was apparent, but it didn't sit right with him. Her tears were perfectly timed, her words measured, her anguish almost rehearsed. It's too tidy, he thought. A seasoned investigator with a keen ability to read people, Michael knew that the truth often hid in the spaces between what was said and what wasn't. As Michael pieced together the timeline, the discrepancies grew harder to ignore. The shattered window, a classic sign of forced entry, raised an immediate red flag. The placement of the glass fragments, scattered outside rather than inside, suggested the window had been broken from within the house, not by an intruder. The scattered belongings told a similar story. Valuables like jewelry and electronics remained untouched, while less significant items, such as an old photo frame and a decorative clock, were missing. These were not the actions of a thief motivated by greed, but someone attempting to create the illusion of a robbery. And then there was the murder weapon, a heavy candlestick, wiped clean of fingerprints but left conspicuously on the floor near Richard's body. Its placement felt deliberate, almost as though someone wanted it to be found. But why? Neighbors provided another piece of the puzzle. While no one reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles or suspicious activity on the night of the murder, they did recall hearing something unusual. It wasn't out of the ordinary for them to argue, one neighbor said. But that night, it sounded different. Angrier. More intense. The argument, described as heated and prolonged, was heard just hours before the 911 call. As the detective conducted more interviews, a clearer picture of the O'Reilly household began to emerge. Friends and acquaintances described a couple whose marriage had grown increasingly strained. Elizabeth was portrayed as ambitious and assertive, often dominating conversations and decisions. Richard, by contrast, was quieter, more reserved, and described as someone who avoided conflict whenever possible. But in the weeks leading up to his death, Richard had begun confiding in close friends about his plans to leave. He had even sought legal advice about custody, expressing concerns about Elizabeth's temper and how it might affect their daughter, Kara. The forensic team's findings further complicated Elizabeth's account. Blood spatter patterns around the living room painted a story that contradicted hers. This wasn't a random act of violence, one forensic expert explained. The patterns indicated that the victim was attacked from behind while seated, with no signs of a struggle. It was calculated, deliberate. The position of Richard's body also raised questions. He was found lying face down in the living room, but the absence of defensive wounds suggested he hadn't seen the attack coming. Combined with the trajectory of the blood spatter, it became evident that the blow had been delivered with precision, likely by someone he trusted enough not to suspect harm. The toxicology report delivered the final blow to Elizabeth's story. Traces of a sedative were found in Richard's bloodstream, enough to leave him disoriented and vulnerable. The timeline of its effects matched the hours leading up to his death, indicating premeditation rather than spontaneity. As Michael delved deeper into Elizabeth's background, more inconsistencies emerged. Financial records revealed that she had recently increased Richard's life insurance policy, doubling the payout in the event of his death. Coupled with mounting debts from her business ventures, the timing of the policy adjustment felt far from coincidental. Elizabeth's digital footprint provided even more damning evidence. Deleted search histories recovered from her laptop included phrases like how to stage a robbery, undetectable sedatives, and life insurance payout timelines. These were not the searches of a curious bystander, they were the hallmarks of a carefully plotted scheme. Even Elizabeth's alibi began to crumble under scrutiny. Her claim of being upstairs when the alleged intruder broke in was contradicted by forensic evidence suggesting she was present in the living room during the attack. Neighbors reported seeing her leave the house earlier that evening, her face pale and her movements hurried. Details that didn't align with her version of events. Michael also began to consider the psychological aspects of the case. Elizabeth's behavior at the scene was telling. While she cried for the cameras and spoke of her love for Richard, her demeanor in private was starkly different. Her responses to Michael's questions were calculated and evasive. When asked about Richard's recent attempts to secure custody of Kara, her reaction was sharp, defensive. "He would never leave me," she snapped, before quickly regaining her composure. It was a moment that didn't go unnoticed. Michael's interviews with friends and colleagues of Elizabeth revealed a woman who was both admired and feared. Known for her charisma and determination, she had built a reputation as a savvy entrepreneur. But beneath the surface, there were whispers of a controlling personality and a ruthless streak when things didn't go her way. These traits, once seen as strengths in her professional life, now cast a darker shadow over her personal one. Piece by piece, Michael began to assemble a timeline that painted a chilling picture. The argument overheard by neighbors was likely the breaking point. Richard's plans to leave and take Kara with him threatened to upend the carefully constructed life Elizabeth had built. Faced with the loss of control and the prospect of public humiliation, she made a choice, one that would forever alter the course of her family's story. Michael presented his findings to his team, laying out the evidence in meticulous detail. The staged crime scene, the financial motive, the forensic contradictions, and the digital trail all pointed to one conclusion: Elizabeth O'Reilly had planned and executed her husband's murder, disguising it as a robbery to deflect suspicion. As the investigation neared its conclusion, Michael confronted Elizabeth with the evidence. Her initial confidence wavered as the weight of the findings bore down on her. Her denials grew weaker, her answers more erratic. In the face of mounting proof, her carefully curated facade began to crumble. By the time the arrest warrant was issued, Michael felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. He had uncovered the truth, but it came at a heavy cost. A family was shattered, a child left without her parents, and a community left to grapple with the realization that even the most seemingly perfect lives can hide unspeakable darkness. The trial of Elizabeth O'Reilly captivated Brookhaven and beyond. A case that began as a seemingly tragic home invasion had transformed into a story of betrayal, manipulation, and murder. For many, the courtroom was the stage where the full truth would finally emerge. The prosecution painted Elizabeth as a master manipulator, a woman who meticulously planned her husband's murder to rid herself of what she saw as a burden. Her motive, they argued, was simple: control. In contrast, the defense portrayed Elizabeth as a devoted wife and mother, overwhelmed by the pressures of her life. They argued that the evidence against her was circumstantial, built on assumptions rather than facts. The prosecution methodically laid out the evidence. Each purchase, each search, each detail tied Elizabeth to the crime. The shattered glass inside the home, the sedative in Richard's system, and the staged robbery left little doubt in their narrative. Expert witnesses testified to the deliberate nature of Richard's poisoning, emphasizing that the amount administered left no room for error. It was, they said, a calculated act. The defense sought to cast doubt on the investigation, suggesting that Detective Michael's conclusions were based on bias rather than objectivity. They argued that the evidence could be explained by a botched robbery, not premeditation. When Elizabeth took the stand, she presented herself as a woman misunderstood. She claimed that her internet searches were out of curiosity, not intent, and that her purchases were unrelated to her husband's death. But under cross-examination, Elizabeth's story began to crumble. Her explanations grew inconsistent, her composure cracked, and her attempts to shift blame rang hollow. The jury listened closely, weighing Elizabeth's words against the mountain of evidence. Her testimony, instead of exonerating her, seemed to seal her fate. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Elizabeth O'Reilly, once a pillar of her community, now faced the consequences of her actions. The judge sentenced Elizabeth to life in prison without the possibility of parole, citing the premeditated nature of her crime and its devastating impact on her family. Cara, now in the care of her grandparents, would grow up with the shadow of her parents' tragedy looming over her, a child robbed of her innocence by the choices of those she trusted most. The trial of Elizabeth O'Reilly was not just a quest for justice, but a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how unchecked ambition and pride can destroy lives. For those left behind, the scars will remain, but so will the lessons learned from a tragedy that rocked a community to its core. The trial may have ended, but the story of the O'Reilly family continued to reverberate through the lives it touched. For the quiet suburb of Brookhaven, the once idyllic image of the O'Reilly home had been forever changed. The whispers of betrayal and loss lingered, a reminder that even the most picture-perfect lives can hide unimaginable truths. Neighbors who once admired Elizabeth's success struggled to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with a convicted murderer in the courtroom. For some, it was a lesson in the dangers of assumptions. For others, it was simply a tragedy beyond comprehension. For Cara, now 8 years old, life became a delicate balance of holding on to the past and moving forward. Under the care of her grandparents, she found stability, but the absence of her parents was a void that could never truly be filled. Therapists and counselors worked with Cara to help her process the trauma. Her laughter returned in fleeting moments, but her drawings often told a different story, one of longing and confusion about the parents she lost in two very different ways. She visited her father's grave often, her questions about him growing more complex with time. As she learned more about what happened, the weight of understanding bore heavily on her young shoulders. Elizabeth, now serving a life sentence, maintained her innocence to anyone who would listen. Her days were a far cry from the life she once led, structured, monotonous, and filled with reminders of what she had lost. She wrote letters to Cara, expressing love and regret. But the letters, filled with attempts to explain her actions, often went unanswered. For Cara, the pain of her mother's betrayal was too great to bridge. For Detective Michael, the O'Reilly case was one he would never forget. It was a reminder of the complexities of human behavior and the importance of listening to the quiet signs of trouble before they escalate into tragedy. The case sparked conversations about power dynamics, manipulation, and the hidden struggles within families. Community programs were launched to educate and support those in troubled relationships, ensuring that Richard's death would not be in vain. Life in Brookhaven moved on, but the memory of the O'Reilly family lingered, a cautionary tale etched into the fabric of the community, a story of love turned to tragedy, and the resilience of those left to pick up the pieces. The O'Reilly family's story is one of heartbreak, a family torn apart not by fate, but by the devastating choices made within. Richard, a devoted father and husband, lost his life in a cruel act of betrayal. Elizabeth, once a woman of ambition and strength, now lived in a cage of her own making. And Cara, an innocent child, bears the weight of a tragedy she had no part in creating. Their story left a scar on the community of Brookhaven, a stark reminder that beneath the surface of even the most perfect lives, untold struggles and dangers can brew. In another life, this family could have thrived. With love, communication, and mutual respect, they could have overcome their challenges together. But the seeds of control and pride, left unchecked, grew into something far more destructive. What might have been a story of triumph became a cautionary tale of the cost of silence and unchecked ambition. The O'Reilly case reminds us of the importance of recognizing the signs of dysfunction early. Power struggles, manipulation, and emotional abuse may not leave visible scars, but their consequences can be just as devastating. If you or someone you know feels trapped in an unhealthy relationship, speak up. Seek help. There is no shame in asking for support, it could save a life. Resources exist to guide people toward healthier relationships and safer lives. Sometimes, the simple act of reaching out can change the trajectory of a story like this one. The O'Reilly family's tragedy serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the consequences of unchecked emotions. Their story is not just about loss, it's about the choices we make and the legacies we leave behind. Let us honor Richard's memory by striving to be kinder, more aware, and willing to confront the difficult truths in our own lives. Because in the end, it is our actions, not our intentions, that define the world we create for ourselves and those we love. If you are new to our channel, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell button for more intriguing true crime stories that will leave you at the edge of your seats. We draw the curtain on today's episode. Until next time, stay safe.